Oh, I'm so excited. Finally got this car running good. If you don't recall, when we first got the car, I put it on the dyno at P-tuning and it made 400 wheel horsepower. It was great. The power was awesome. But what they told me was that the idle was running ridiculously rich. How rich do you say? Man, it was like 10 to 1. And I was like, okay, that's pretty bad. It sounds like it's something I definitely need to fix. It's a daily driver. Fuel economy is crappy. Definitely want to get this resolved. Unfortunately, the car had an HKS FCON installed, which is a piggyback ECU, and nobody in the US tuned it. So the solution was to rip it out and find a new ECU to replace it. What I ended up doing was going with a Haltech Platinum Pro plug-in ECU. It's a complete standalone unit. So this is the old one that we ripped out, and it's kind of in this box right here. And the HKS FCON had its own map sensor that went along with it. That was mounted down here, and it ran a signal into the car to this piggyback. And as a piggyback, you know, it doesn't work the greatest. The other thing that was on this car that I replaced, it had these HKS pod filters that have, well, filters inside that got kind of nasty, and I decided to replace those at the same time and picked up some Apexi filters for the car. Now, with the Haltech standalone, it's not simply throw it in there and go tune it. No, you have to do a couple other things. One is that you have to get a wideband sensor for the car, and that will allow your tuner to tune it. You know, they know if it's running rich, if it's running lean, and they can tune it properly. So I installed a wideband. You go inside the car, and I had to wire that to the ECU and ground it to the ECU so that the signal is consistent, and it's just good practice. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but that's what they say to do. The other thing is, and this is nice about the Haltech Platinum Pro, it has a built-in map sensor. So rather than having to wire a map sensor somewhere, run a line to it, run a wire to the car, which isn't really a big deal, I just ran a vacuum line straight into the damn car to the ECU. So the ECU itself can control boost then from that map sensor with this MAC valve. So the boost is completely controlled by the ECU, which is pretty cool. And at the same time, that allowed me to remove the old HKS EVC4 that was on there. So removing all the HKS electronics, going Haltech, MAC valve, using the built-in map sensor, and then just wiring in the wideband. Sounds simple enough, right? Takes a little bit of time. Now, here's the issue that I ran into, is that the car has bigger turbos, full exhaust, all the bolt-ons. It also has unknown, well, we think they're Nismo 555 injectors. And unknown age, unknown condition, obviously they worked, but I wanted to make sure that since I was spending the money on the tune and doing everything else, I want to do it right. So I ended up buying Injector Dynamics 1050X injectors, and I had to wire those in because they didn't use the same style clips as the original factory style injectors, which meant ripping up this wiring harness, cutting the old ones off, wiring the new ones in. That was a fun time, let me tell you. Anyway, in addition to that, we had to remove the resistor pack, which lowered the voltage to the original injectors. You can read more about that, I won't go into it. Then I ended up replacing the spark plugs because new tune, you should have fresh plugs, obviously. I was also going to install a bigger fuel pump, but time pretty much prevented me from doing that, and I figured, hey, the car had already dynoed at 400 wheel horsepower, right? So the pump that's in there should be good for that, you would think, yeah? And as long as, in my mind, as long as I hit that 400 wheel horsepower and had it retuned, I'd just call it a win. So I took off Wednesday, took off Thursday, started working on the car. Thursday night, finally got the car running, got the base map installed, and the car fired up. All right, it is 11 and our tuner got the car running, so we made it. Didn't have enough time to mess with the fuel pump that next morning, and I had to drive down to Richmond, almost 90 minutes away from here to meet the tuner. Now the base map allows me to drive the car gingerly. I can't get into boost safely, so I needed to go get that tuned, which is hence the drive and scheduling everything in advance, and needed to make sure that the car was done. So we get down there, we put it on the dyno. Matt Shu.
I'm Matt Shu, and we're here today to tune this R32 GTR.
Does a great job doing partial tuning, partial throttle tuning, so the car drives fantastic. And then we started increasing the boost from stock level up to, we went to 15 pounds of boost, which made 345 all wheel horsepower at that, not rear wheel. And then we bumped the boost up even more to 18 PSI, which is what we had dynoed at P tuning earlier when it made 400. Just finished up and we ran into an issue when we tried to run 18 pounds of boost, which is 1.3 bar. Apparently we're running out of fuel on the top end. I think it was right around 6,500 RPM or so. It was making 370 on this dyno at that point, but we just couldn't get any more fuel to it safely to continue on. So we ended up backing it down to 1.1 bar, which is 15 pounds or so, and that made 330 wheel horsepower. 335 on this Superflow, so it might rate a little bit higher on some other dynos, but so of all the things, we were fuel limited on that run. We would have went well over 400 wheel horsepower tuning that at 18 PSI, but we had to call it short there. So unfortunately, we had to figure out what was going on with the fuel pump. We then discovered, nobody tells you this when you're looking at fuel pumps, that there's a fuel pump control module in the car, and that was limiting the fuel pump to only receiving 11 volts, which means it wasn't pumping as much as it could, and therefore not providing enough fuel pressure, and that's why we had our fuel issue. So next steps, I believe, is to completely bypass that module, get more power to the fuel pump, and at that point, we'll probably replace it with a bigger fuel pump altogether and make sure we have plenty of fuel to make big numbers if we want, although on this engine, it's probably not safe to go over 20 pounds of boost without replacing the head gasket or going to bigger replacing the head bolts. In any case, we ended up backing the boost down to 15 PSI. It makes 345-ish horse. It's plenty fast. It runs great. It idles great. Drivability is so much smoother. It's really night and day. I went from a car that ran okay for being 25 to a car that runs pretty good. Gotta say, it does feel a lot smoother, and power comes on pretty well. 1.1 it's not slow. It's not fast, but it's not slow. And it sounds good. Next thing coming for this car is a brake upgrade. So it's got the standard smaller GTR rotors on here, which I think are 11.7 inch or so, and they are aluminum calipers, but I picked up a set of R32 GTR Brembos, which are bigger calipers and they have larger rotors, which is going to make this car more track worthy, and that's coming up probably in a couple weeks. So that's where we're at. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you guys later.